you, frankly, to, quote, self-certify a lot of what was going on at FTX. And there are people who look at that and say it was all part of a scheme.
So, I mean, unpacking piece of that, when you look at like this, the CFTC regulation there, ultimately there may have been an ability to self-certify contracts, but prior to that, we went through a congressional hearing, a public comment period, a public roundtable, a year of inquiries, and tens of thousands of hours, thousands of pages of submitted documents, and still had not gotten to the point of having a license to offer margin futures in the United States. And so it was an extraordinarily long and hard process that we were going through with the CFTC. It was by far the most intensive regulatory process that I'd ever seen.
Can you speak to the lobbying piece of it, though?
Yeah.
And the donations piece of it? Because I think that's become part of the story as to whether you effectively were influencing lawmakers to do your bidding. And given the state of your current company, questions about whether that should be the case.
So, I mean, lawmakers were not ruling on FTX. FTX didn't have an application before Congress for anything. My donations were mostly for pandemic prevention, and they were looking at primary elections where there were candidates who were outspoken in favor of doing things now to prevent the next pandemic. That was the primary thing that I was supporting with those contributions. And it was on both sides of the aisle, primarily operating in both primaries, because I wasn't viewing it as a partisan exercise. I was not, most of this was not looking at donating to one party to beat the other one in the general elections here. It was, not only was it on both sides, but even within each side, it was between two candidates in the same party, and it was looking at pandemic policy.
Where did the money come from for those donations?
So, basically profits. I mean, it was substantially smaller than the amount of trading profits that Alameda had made over the prior few years.
Related to this, you had a meeting with Gary Gensler. You also met with folks at CFIUS. Do you think you needed to buy your way into those meetings?
I mean, I don't think I need to buy my way into them. I do think it was harder than I would have thought it would be to get to the point of being even able to have meetings with some regulators. And I mean, I spent hundreds of hours, probably thousands of hours in DC trying to get to the point where I could even have meetings with some of the relevant regulators. But that wasn't a money thing. And I mean, there's no donations to Gary Gensler's. He doesn't even have a campaign to donate to in the first place. That was like elbow grease. I mean, that was just asking again and again and again to have meetings with relevant regulators and, submitting hundreds and thousands of pages of documents.
You also made big investments in a number of media companies, and I think that's raised a lot of questions about whether you were trying to buy influence. Can you speak to that?
I mean, I think media matters a lot, and I want to support good media ventures. That was the whole thesis there. And, I don't have like governance over any of these. I wasn't looking for governance over them. I was looking to support journalists doing great work because I think what they do is really important. And I think that there needs to be a critical eye on stories. I'm certainly seeing, being on getting the brunt of a lot of that right now. And, frankly, I think it's healthy for the world that there is real investigative journalism.
Your parents are law professors. What did you tell them when all of this happened?
I mean, I don't remember exactly when I reached out to them, but I think I called them up and said, hey guys, I think there might be a problem. Like things, looks like Alameda's position might be imploding here, and there might be liquidity issues, and I'll tell you more when I know more. That's my guess about roughly what I said. But honestly, that week so much happened. It's a little bit of a blur to me exactly what was said.
And what are they telling you now?
And look, it's been a hard period for anyone who was close to me, and none of them deserved that. And I feel really, I mean, look, like a lot of, obviously, the largest number of people who were hurt here were customers, and I feel incredibly bad about that. But anyone who was close to me, you know, including my parents, including employees, coworkers who you know fought with the company to push forward, were hurt by this and bore no responsibility for that. I feel really bad about that, and I mean, I feel really grateful for the support that my parents are still giving me, you know, throughout all of this.
Can you explain the real estate piece of this to us? I think there's been a number of headlines, as you know, about FTX, the company, buying a lot of real estate up in the Bahamas, where you lived, at least at the time, was owned by the company. But then there's also reports that your parents signed and were effectively provided with what seemed like a vacation home.
So I don't know the details of that house for my parents, but I know that it was not intended to be their long-term property. I know it was intended to be the company's property. I don't know how that was papered, and I think that was where it was and will end up. I think they may have stayed there while working, you know, with the company sometime over the last year. When you look at the rest of it, there were a lot of property purchases in the Bahamas. You know, the reason for that is we had, you know, 100, you know, basically 100 Silicon Valley, you know, top Silicon Valley employees come down here to work for FTX, and you know, we were trying to incentivize that and to, you know, make sure that they had an easy way to find a comfortable life, so that they'd be willing to move and help build out the product. And so, you know, those 100 people put together here did end up, you know, buying a substantial amount of property. And I feel bad about some of how those investments may turn out for them.
Can you just speak to the idea of this company that, at least from the public perspective, seemed like a regulated company or something that was very focused on compliance? You would go to Washington, you talk about compliance, you talk about trust. Crypto ultimately is actually about trust. It's about not having to trust others, frankly. It's supposed to be a trustless system. That's why you trust trust it so much, supposedly. But it seems like when you read the stories, it sounds like a bunch of kids who were on Adderall having a sleepover party.
I mean, look, I screwed up. Like, I was CEO. I was the CEO of FTX. And I mean, I'd say this again and again, that means I had a responsibility. That means that I was responsible ultimately for us doing the right things. And I mean, we didn't. Like, we messed up big.
But there were people, though, who were telling you needed more compliance, no?
There were, but I think that compliance, we were spending an enormous amount of our energy on compliance. We were spending an enormous amount of our energy on regulation, on licensure. We were getting licensed in dozens of jurisdictions. I think, frankly, we were spending probably too much of our energy getting licensed in retrospect. And, you know, there were some places where I think that the reporting and transparency obligations from that licensure actually did help. I think when you look at, I mean, FTX US derivatives, I think when you look at FTX Japan, which I think is fully solvent, which I think could make all customers whole tomorrow if it were, if, you know, the sort of relevant teams were to allow it to. I'm confused why it hasn't. But I think that a lot of what we ended up doing and focusing on was a distraction to some extent from one unbelievably important area that we completely failed on, and that was risk. That was risk management. That was, customer position risk, and frankly, conflict of interest risk. And there was no person who was chiefly in charge of positional risk of customers on FTX, and that feels pretty embarrassing in retrospect, because that was, you go back to 2019, even 2018, and ask me, why am I starting to build out FTX? What's the point of it? And what I would have said was, look, the existing crypto derivatives exchanges have large risk management failures, that every day there are millions of dollars that are being lost by customers because of risk management failures, that these contracts are paying out 75 cents on the dollar week after week after week because of risk management blowouts, and that needs to be overhauled. And that was what I was focused on for the beginning of FTX. I was not focused on that for the last year or two. I got less grounded from that, and I started focusing on the bigger picture, on future business avenues, on licensure, on a lot of things. And I mean, we lost track of a really important part of the business and of the product. And so there absolutely were management failures, huge management failures. I bear responsibility for that. There were oversight failures, transparency failures, reporting, like so many things we should have had in place. I think that a lot of it was on the risk management side.
Let me ask you about that, which is, we had Larry Fink here today, and he had a stake in FTX. And Sequoia and Paradigm and some very big venture capital firms had given you money. And I'm curious if they ever asked you questions about this risk management and whether they bear any responsibility for what clearly now appears, and you're saying, was at minimum a lack of oversight, if not something much worse.
I don't think they bear responsibility. I mean, like, when you look at, you put yourself in the eyes of an investor, of a venture capital firm. What you're thinking about primarily is upside, right? What you're thinking about primarily is investing in a private company and thinking, might this 3x, might this 5x, might this even 10x on the upside cases? And yeah, there's some chance that it will go down. There's some chance that maybe it will go down to zero. But that's counterbalanced by the upside propositions here. And so most of what they were focused on was, I think, like, what might FTX become? What's the pathway to get from here to there? What would it take? What are the missing pieces? Rather than, at the point where you're dwelling on all of the various precise downside scenarios and risks for a prospective venture investment, that means you're not investing. Like, if that's where your head's at, if you think the odds are that that's where things are going to end up, why would you do that investment?
Can I ask you about the drugs? You have tweeted about it. Caroline has tweeted about it. Others have tweeted about uppers and downers and all sorts of things. There have been pictures taken of something called MSAM, which apparently increases levels of dopamine to the brain. It's actually for Parkinson's. Were you taking that as a patch?
So it's funny hearing this. I had my first sip of alcohol after my 21st birthday, and I think I have maybe half a glass of alcohol a year, roughly speaking. There were no wild parties here. When we had parties, we'd play board games, and 20% of people would have 3/4 of a beer each, or something like that. And the rest of us would not drink anything. I see any illegal drug use around me, at the office, at these parties, like, and when I say parties, I mean, like, having people over for dinner is what that meant. And look, I can't talk about anyone else, like, what they're prescribed between themselves and their doctors or psychiatrists. I can say for me, I don't know, like, I've been prescribed various things at various times to help with focus and concentration. And I think they have done that. I haven't felt any of, the sort of impact that I think people have been theorizing here from it. And it's not a huge impact, in the first place. Anyway, I think, these have all just been totally on-label use of medications, and I think things that on the margin helped me focus a little bit. I wish I had been a lot more focused over the last year.
I may have been unfocused in this last moment because I actually wanted to follow up on the question when we're talking about venture capitalists.
Yep.
Sequoia and Paradigm invested in you, but there have now been questions about the fact that you invested in them, and whether these were what some people describe in the business round-trip deals. Can you speak to that?
I think well after they had invested in FTX, and I don't know the details, but I think there may have been a small investment into some of their funds. I think it was something that we did because I don't believe in what they were doing. It seemed like a good opportunity, and didn't think too much about it.
I'm curious, just on a very personal level, as we get close to ending this conversation, to the degree that there's been a lesson in this, and that what you see as your future at this point. I know you're taking it day to day, obviously, and I know you're an optimist as well. We've talked about that.
Yeah.
But what do you think realistically is your future?
So, what is my future? I don't know what my far future is. And, when you fast forward, I have no idea what I'm going to be doing, a long time from now. I think when I look at, at the near and medium term, what am I thinking? What I'm thinking is, and again, I don't know what's going to happen, and a lot of it's not in my hands at this point. But I want to be helpful wherever I can to regulators, administrators, internationally, who are working to help FTX's customers, and I want to be helpful wherever I can on anything that could help bring a lot more value to those customers. And I don't know where that will lead. I can say that prior to filing, there had been a lot of interest in financing, a lot of fairly strong interest, many billions of dollars worth. I can't make any promises about anything, but I would have thought that there would be, a chance for a pathway forward here that would bring more value to customers than what would happen if you just sort of sold everything else for scraps.
Right.
And I don't have confidence. I can't promise you, I can't promise anyone anything there, and it's not really in my hands to a large extent. But I would think that it would make sense to be exploring that, because I think there's a chance that customers could end up made a lot more whole, I don't know, maybe even fully whole, if there was a really strong concerted effort.
How would that happen?
So, there have been examples of this before in crypto history where that happened. Obviously, you can look at what happened with Bitfinex back a number of years ago, where it got hacked and then ended up making, over a few-year period, customers whole. There are a lot of assets that are on hand here, although many of them are not liquid. They were worth quite a bit more than the needed liabilities a month ago, even, let alone a year ago. There's at least a month ago, there were, or I guess, 3 weeks ago, billions of dollars of potential funding opportunities. I don't know that it would have been great for my stake as a shareholder of FTX, but that's not what matters here. And I think it would have brought more financing to customers. You saw, obviously, the Tron facility, which is open for a little while on FTX, which allowed some customers to get liquidity. You put some of these together. There's obviously equity in the business. where does that lead? I don't know exactly, and again, it's not going to be my decision to make at the end of the day. But I think there's a shot for a real value.
Sam, we're going to have to wrap up, and a couple of just quick other questions. One is, given what you know about compliance or the lack of it in this business, in this industry, I think there are a lot of people who are holding crypto today, perhaps on exchanges like Binance and other places.
Yep.
What should they think, given what you do know, and to the extent that you can tell us the truth about what you know?
What should they think? And I presume you're asking what should they think about the safety of their assets going forward? And
correct.
Yeah. So look, I obviously don't know exactly what's going on at other exchanges. I can tell you what I would think as a customer, if I were a customer here, which is look for the things that I wish FTX had been able to supply. Things like proof of reserves is helpful. Look for as rigorous of that as you can. Look for regulatory reporting, right? You look at what the JFSA had in place in Japan. You look at what FTX US derivatives had with sort of frequent reporting to regulators of exactly what customer assets, balances, liabilities, distributions are.
What about the governance piece?
Yeah.
What about the governance piece? Because one of the things we have not talked about is you had no board and you had no CFO. And that should have been a red flag, frankly, for all of us.
So interestingly, in some ways we had too many boards. We had...
Oh, goodness. Hopefully we're going to get him back in just a moment, if we can. Thank you for indulging us. We are almost finished with this interview. Are we going to get him back? Hang tight just for 1 second, if we could. Can we try to bring Sam back just to complete this interview? Thanks, everybody, for sticking with us. We are going to be back with Sam Bankman-Fried, I believe, in just literally a moment as they connect the feed. Sam, thank you for coming back.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
We were in the middle of the conversation about no board, no CFO, and you said something which I think raised a lot of eyebrows here. You said you thought you had too many boards.
Yeah. And can you hear me here?
Yep, we can all hear you.
Good? Yep, cool. So we didn't talk about much, but there's a board of FTX Japan, there's a board of FTX US derivatives, FTX Australia, FTX Singapore, FTX Europe. We had, I think, more than a dozen boards when you look at all of the entities put together. And many of these boards had regulatory functions. I think the problem to some extent was, okay, sure, you have all these boards, but at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, who's the person who's in charge of global or the board or the function that's in charge of global site customer risk management? Like, there's a diffusion of responsibility to some extent on that front, and there needed to be, I think, a single or a small set of entities, whether of boards, people, of responsible parties that were sitting there saying, I feel responsible for what happens on FTX. And we had actually audited financials. From the FTX finances perspective, we had infrastructure, but from the customer risk and finances perspective, much less.
Sam, how much money do you have left at this point?
To my knowledge, like close to nothing. Basically everything was just in the companies. It's...
You didn't put away some money somewhere?
No, I don't have any hidden funds here. Everything I have, I'm disclosing, and I'm down to I think I have one working credit card left. I think it might be $100,000 or something like that in that bank account. Everything that I had, even all the loans I had were those, those are all things I was reinvesting in the businesses that I'd put everything I had into FTX.
I want to ask you two final questions. Were you truthful with us today?
I was as truthful as you know, I'm knowledgeable to be. There's some things I wish I knew more about, but yes, I was.
So let me ask you this. Do you agree that over time you also lied?
Do I agree that I lied? I don't know of times when I lied. I think, look, there are certainly times when I was acting as a representative, as a marketer for FTX, and when I was looking for how can I, you know, in a way which is truthful, but, you know, paint FTX as, you know, compelling a way as possible, as exciting and optimistic a way as possible. And, you know, I wasn't thinking about, I wasn't talking about what are the risks involved with FTX, you know, there.
Right.
I obviously wish that I'd spent more time dwelling on the downsides and less time thinking about the upsides.
Sam Bankman-Fried, I want to thank you for this interview. I hope that some of the answers have been helpful as we've tried to understand and untangle what is a still tangled story. Sam, I know that this has been a difficult conversation and a tough conversation. And on behalf of everybody here and on behalf of the public, I want to thank you for engaging in it at a time in truth when I know you've been advised not to. So thank you so very, very much. Thank you. Sam Bankman-Fried, everybody. Thank you. Before everybody goes, we have one last little surprise, and it's just to maybe put a smile on everybody's face and maybe make you think just a little bit. We are grateful to have FLS Plus here, Freestyle Love Supreme, for those of you who know it better that way, from Broadway, and they are here to close us out. Thank you, everybody, for a fabulous day, and I look forward to seeing you next year.
If they're still out there?
I don't know.
Is that interview on? I mean,
Okay.
should we do it? We're live. All right, bring it in. Bring it in.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for coming. I knew you were not going, but thank you.
Stuff in at the close, though. It was perfect.
Mic check.